thing that Sarah Sanders put in her book. We're going to have her here in just a second. Yeah, it says, let's face, here's Mick Mulvaney she chronicled an interaction between her and Mick Mulvaney, who is famously is known as pretty equal balanced. He never got upset. He wasn't territorial as chief of staff. Mick Mulvaney they have this story in Sarah's book that John Bolton got in his own car and got to an event without communicating with anyone. Mick Mulvaney to John Bolton, here's the quote. Let's face it, John, you're a blank, self-righteous, self-centered son of a B. And he goes on from there. And she wanted to chronicle that because she wanted to say that there was not only tensions with the president, right, there was tensions amongst the staff with John Bolton.
Well, we hope to have Sarah established via audio here in just a moment. But we could talk a little bit about the John Bolton book, which is officially being released today. Usually you find out what's in a book the day it's published, but there have been so many leaks, so many interviews about it as well. Now we understand Sarah Sanders can actually hear us. Congratulations. Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah. Good morning. Sorry about that.
It's okay, because we have been all operating remotely. There are problems with it and challenges. So tell us about the John Bolton you know. Is a John Bolton we don't know. Who is he?
Look, right now, I think he's a disgrace to the country. I think what he's doing right now is absolutely appalling. And I write about in my book, speaking for myself, John Bolton was your classic case of someone who was completely drunk on power, who thought he was the president. He was constantly pushing his own agenda, which was all he cared about. The big problem for John Bolton is that's not how it works. He forgot that no one elected him to anything and that it was President Trump and President Trump's agenda that mattered within the White House.
Sarah, some of the comments that he said that are raising some eyebrows. He said he's not worthy of the position and that the president makes decisions on a whim. What's your reaction to that? Is that true?
If anybody is unworthy of a position, it is somebody who takes an opportunity given to them like John Bolton does and runs out the second he gets released from that job and starts to change his tune. He was either lying when he was in the room where it happened or he's lying now. And I think John Bolton has absolutely zero credibility since for 17 months he went out and championed President Trump and his agenda, saying all the things that he was doing right, how he had been tough on a variety of countries, and now all of a sudden that he is a disgruntled former employee, his entire tune changes. It just doesn't work like that, John, and I don't think he has any credibility at this point. Let's not forget, no one was tougher on China, Iran, Russia, North Korea than President Trump, far more so than Obama or Biden. And John Bolton knows that, and it's an indisputable fact because everybody else knows it too. And unfortunately, he doesn't get to rewrite history and change the story now.
Sarah, are you surprised that John Kelly, General Mattis, and now John Bolton are all critical of the president, being that you were behind the scenes and we were not?
Look, one of the things that I hope people will see in my book that comes out in September is a side of President Trump who loves this country, who woke up every day looking for ways he could make it better, and is at his heart and at his core actually a very generous, caring person. I tell a lot of behind the scenes moments where you see that come through, and I think that that's the side of America that I hope people will take away. I spent infinitely more time with the president than Bolton, Kelly, or Mattis, and I hope that people will see that when my book comes out in September.
Yep, we'll be looking for that. But ultimately, you know, we've heard so many contrary things from some of these people who had been posted close to the president. If you were the president, you'd think, can I really trust this person? Can I really open myself up and ask for a point of view? He's going to wind up writing a book, too.
I bet he does, and I think it'll be one for the ages when that happens after he finishes another 4 years as president.
Yeah, you know, Sarah, I think more about the other leaders. Is this the National Security Advisor that I'm having a confidential conversation with the President of the United States? Is this going to be the one who writes a book while I'm still in office? The President Xi, Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin? I'm sure they didn't want all this stuff going public, even someone's version of what went public. Real quick, your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, and I think that's why what John Bolton is doing right now is such a disgrace to the country. He was a part of something very sensitive, classified, and for him to betray not just the trust of the president, but the entire country and those other world leaders, I think is very damaging, and I think it shows at his core who he is.
Yeah.
Sarah Sanders, thanks
also,
so
he's
much.
made the party upset because could divide the party in November, or some people might not vote because of what he said. All right, thanks so much, Sarah. Great to see you.